from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
The West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, working with students and families to improve college access and student success for a better West Virginia.
Good evening, I'm Andrea Lanham. Tonight on the Legislature Today, we'll hear two very different perspectives on budget policy and what lawmakers should do this session to move the state forward. Revenue estimates are running ahead of projections, but how confident should lawmakers be as they consider next year's budget decisions? We'll talk about focus and priorities later in the program. But first, a bill that would remove Medicaid funding for medically necessary abortions has been drawing a lot of attention in the House since passing through the House Health Committee last week. Dave Mistich reports.
According to a recent Hart Research poll, nearly two-thirds of West Virginia voters support the state's Medicaid program, covering a range of reproductive health care services, including annual checkups, prenatal and maternity care, birth control, and abortion. House Bill 4012 would remove abortion from that list of services that Medicaid provides. While the issue is inherently divisive, many questions about the bill's constitutionality have been raised, further drawing attention to the matter. In 1993, the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals overturned a law signed by then-Governor Gaston Caperton that included a provision banning abortions for low-income women when medically necessary. The court determined that it was discriminatory to not provide such services to low-income women. Republican delegate Kayla Kessinger is the lead sponsor of House Bill 4012. She says the bill takes a different approach to the one that was struck down in 1993.
The way that we're going about this bill is to redefine the medical procedure, and we are well within our rights as the legislature to define and redefine words. We do it almost every day in the legislative process. So I believe that this bill is constitutional, but as with every piece of legislation we pass, the Supreme Court can and may have the final decision.
Kessinger also argues that some taxpayers object to paying for abortions, and that the number and cost of them has increased in recent years. According to data from the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources Bureau for Medical Services, 1,506 abortions were provided by Medicaid in state fiscal year 2017, coming in at a cost of more than $326,000. While the number of Medicaid-funded abortions has more than doubled since 2008, the cost to the state has increased by about a third, an increase of just over $100,000. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists opposed the bill. As an OBGYN, House Health Chairman Joe Ellington is a member of that organization.
There are concerns on both sides of that issue. One concern is that having taxpayer money that goes toward performing an abortion, but on the other side, and the position the West Virginia ACOG has, is that you want to make sure that our citizens can obtain safe and legal abortions if they so desire. Paying for that is how you would go about that, though. So whether taxpayer funds go to it or contributions from private organizations or nonprofit organizations that may supplement the cost for individuals that are seeking abortions, as long as they do it under the code of West Virginia, it should still be legal.
Top House Democrats, though, argue that the bill should not be a priority for the legislature. Minority Leader Tim Miley also says the legislation addresses an issue that doesn't need attention and, furthermore, gets in the way of decisions made between a woman and her doctor.
This is par for the course for this leadership team of raising issues that try to divide people instead of bring people together. But in this case, I understand the bill is to address pregnancy terminations that are paid for by Medicaid. Now, just to be clear, the only pregnancies that are terminated by using Medicaid are those that are medically necessary and certified by a doctor that they are medically necessary. So I'm not really sure what the issue is and why they're trying to make it an issue, other than to having government inject itself into the lives of a woman and the advice she's getting from her doctor.
House Minority Whip Mike Caputo echoed Miley's concerns as far as legislative priorities. And with House Bill 4012's constitutionality in question, Caputo says the Republican majority may be using the measure as a barometer for support for a joint resolution that could find its way onto the ballot as a constitutional amendment. But if it comes to that, Caputo says the issue should stand on its own and away from election of state officials.
If this Republican leadership team really believes that's an issue that should be on the ballot and it's about policy, then let's have a special election or let's do it prior to the general election, because they believe that by putting this on the ballot that it will bring out more of their base and elect more Republicans to their caucus. I don't know if that's true or not true, but the only point I want to make is if this is really about policy, if this is something they think is good for West Virginia, then we should have it on a special election with no other candidates on there, just these issues, and let's find out what the people really want.
While not yet on the agenda, the House Judiciary Committee is expected to take up House Bill 4012. As for the larger issue of abortion, lawmakers from either chamber have yet to introduce a joint resolution that would address the matter. For the Legislature Today, I'm Dave Mistich at the Capitol.
As lawmakers continue holding budget presentations for state agencies and continue to grapple with how to grow the economy and care for our most vulnerable populations, we've asked the directors of two West Virginia policy research organizations with very different philosophies to join us and offer us all something to think about. Garrett Ballingy is the Executive Director of the Cardinal Institute for West Virginia Policy, and Ted Bettner is the Executive Director of the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me this evening.
Thanks for having us. It's nice to be here.
So first off, I just want to start with your level of confidence in West Virginia's economy. We've had the legislative leadership on here before, and they were very confident in the state's economy and its future. But we also had the minority leadership on here, and while they're happy that we're not grappling with a $500 million budget deficit, I would describe them as cautiously optimistic. So I wanted to gauge your confidence on this as well. Mr. Ballingy, we can start with you.
Well, I would say I feel optimistic, but as any West Virginian, I have a healthy dose of caution. We've had many years of a suboptimal economy, hovering near the bottom when we look at West Virginia compared to other states. I think we have seen the depths of that. I think we're coming out of it. The question is, how quickly are we going to come out of it, and is this something that's sustainable? So again, I would say I'm optimistic, but like some others that you've had on the show, I throw a healthy bit of caution with that.
What's your take on it?
I agree. No, I think largely that's right. I mean, I think we have to be very careful. Every time they do predictions, West Virginia University does, they've been off dramatically every single year. And as we look at other states compared to West Virginia, we're doing pretty bad. We have the fourth highest unemployment rate in the country at 5.5%. Our job growth over the last year is 0.2%, the third lowest in the entire country. So when you look at us compared to other states, we're doing pretty bad. The good news is the national economy is doing pretty well. But as we look in the future, I would be cautiously optimistic. I don't think coal and some other industries might not do as well next year. We should be very cautious about that. And I think lawmakers have a right to be concerned about that. Yogi Berra always said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And I think we ought to be very cautious going forward.
Now, another area where West Virginia doesn't necessarily rank the best is an area called a Genuine Progress Indicator. We all know that we have GDP, which is gross domestic product, and it's a measure of how the state is doing, but there's another measure gaining traction, which is GPI, and it looks at social concerns and environmental costs and how those actually reduce the benefits of measurable economic growth, and West Virginia ranks dead last in this category. So taking a broad look at West Virginia through this lens, isn't it a more comprehensive picture of how we're doing?
Absolutely. We always ask how the business climate in West Virginia is doing for business, but we very rarely ask, how is it doing for working families? That's the one thing that we try to do as a policy organization every step of the way. And when you look at the GPI, the GPI index, it's very different than GDP. So what we've seen over the last couple of years is wages as a share of what we're producing has declined dramatically. So we've seen stagnant wages for the majority of the population in West Virginia. Men in West Virginia make $3.50 less per hour today than they did in 1979, and overall over $1 less. So for most people, they're doing worse. We have half of our children in this state in families that are struggling to make ends meet. And one of the problems is we haven't made that a priority. And the way we do that is through our budget and policy work.
Mr. Ballingy, how would you address these problems?
Well, unfortunately, we have a number of problems that need to be addressed, and I think this is not a surprise to anyone. I think you look from an economic perspective, as everybody knows, we've had some troubles. And so you begin to look, what kind of solutions can we adopt? I would look at something like occupational licensing, for example, is something that not a lot of people talk about. And this is a way, it makes it difficult for people that are maybe transitioning from an old career to a new career, or folks that maybe are a little bit lower income that are trying to be an entrepreneur. So maybe starting their own barber shop, maybe starting their own salon, their own nail salon, their own massage therapy clinic. You know, these kind of licenses can get in the way of those types of people changing careers and transitioning careers from maybe some jobs that they were laid off from or something like that. So I think we need to look at those types of things. We need to have a tax and regulatory environment that makes it easy for jobs to come here and to be created. We need to basically get hurdles out of the way for entrepreneurs to do their thing, which is to grow a business, which is to attract businesses here. And I think if we could do that, we're going to begin to see improvements, and we're already doing that. We're seeing improvements at the federal level, and I think eventually those will find their way to West Virginia using some of those same principles.
Mr. Bettner, what's your response to that?
Well, West Virginia has many challenges, as you talked about, but our two biggest challenges by far, universally recognized, is we have a low post-secondary educational attainment, right? We all agree we are last in the share of people 25 and over with a college degree. And we also have the poorest health. Now, if we continue to pursue trickle-down economics, where let's give more money to business, more power to business, let's give them the break, and hoping that's going to trickle down and help the majority of people and fix these problems, we'd be clearly mistaken. What we need to do is have a bottom-up economy. That means investing in the important foundations of growth, like our schools, our healthcare sector, our infrastructure, our roads, broadband, and also our universities can be engines of economic growth, and we underutilize them in terms of research and development. But we need to be looking at growing from the middle out and the bottom up instead of the top down, because that's where our struggles is. We rank one of the highest in this country in low-wage jobs. So if people don't have money, businesses don't have customers.
Mr. Ballingy, Cardinal put out a report called Wild, Wasteful West Virginia a few years ago, suggesting a long list of entities that you believe should be cut from the state's budget. Some are already gone, but what specific cuts are you suggesting this session?
Well, I think one thing that Ted and I probably would agree on is that the legislature's been looking at eliminating the film tax credit, for example. This is not a huge money saver, but it is an example of sitting down, looking at something and say, are we getting the return on investment that we think is sufficient in order to continue this program? So that's one of the things that we were looking at. Again, not a huge monetary saver. We looked at the Department of Education and the Arts, for example. That's obviously being discussed right now. None of these taken in a vacuum are terribly large, but when you take them combined, they actually do save the state a bit of money. So we're happy to see those things being discussed.
Mr. Bettner, do you agree with that?
I'm not going to give Garrett a bad time for wanting to cut public broadcasting in this report, though. But no, I think the film tax credit is something, if you look at the evidence and research, it's clearly there's not a lot of evidence that it works. I think there's better ways to support arts in our communities through grants instead of handing out film tax credits, because when those companies come in, what they end up having is outside labor, and it tends to be very temporary. A lot of these companies, you're talking billion-dollar film industries, do they need a tax credit to do that here? So I think looking at that, reanalyzing that. But one thing we're not doing that we continue not to do is if we're going to do tax cuts, let's do them for working families. And one thing that has bipartisan support in the state here, also nationally, is the state earned income tax credit, which would give a tax credit to over 150,000 low and moderate income families, because we're trying to get more people into the workforce. And by giving them that tax cut, they can take another job or take on more hours or pay for childcare. And that's one of our biggest problems in West Virginia. We have too many low-wage jobs, and this is something we can directly do to benefit that. It has great outcomes on health, on pregnant women, and also can increase college attainment later on in life. So that's a tax policy we should all embrace.
So what bills are you following this session? I can start with you.
Well, hundreds of them. We tend to follow the tax and budget issues. We're really concerned about the need that some lawmakers want to take food away from very poor individuals, people that are struggling with addiction, people that are chronically homeless, people that may be ex-felons that are trying to get back in the workforce but can only find a 15-hour job. The legislature is somewhat intent on doing that. They're looking at asset tests for the SNAP program. And this is 100% federal money. Also, we're very concerned about things in Medicaid. We're happy to hear that DHHR might not be pursuing a work requirement for Medicaid, which could potentially throw 25 to 50,000 people who have health insurance, adults, most of them all over in working families, off. So we want to make sure we're not going in that direction. But in general, we're looking at budget issues, we're looking at tax issues, and things that pertain to working families.
Mr. Ballingy, what bills are you following this session?
Well, one of the things that we think that would really help turn the state around is education reform. So we're keeping a close eye on anything working its way through the education committees. There are a couple bills that help increase education choice, for example, through what's called education savings accounts. So we're keeping a close eye on those. I know there's a public charter school bill. I'm not as familiar with that one. That's working its way through. So I think this is emblematic, and I think it's a good sign that lawmakers are looking at some fundamental reforms for our education system, because I think that is probably a medium to long-term solution to maybe some of our economic issues that we're actually facing.
Now, this is a question for both of you. How does our shrinking population affect the success of our economy and the vibrancy of our state in the future? I'll start with you, Mr. Ballingy.
Well, I think first and foremost, just if you're a business, it's shrinking your customer base. And so that's a very bad thing. If you're down here on Capitol Street and you're losing 1,000, 2,000 people every year whenever a census estimate is taken, that begins to make you think twice about expanding. You're probably not going to have the kind of cash flow that you would be hoping to have even compared to 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's first and foremost something that would concern me. And then from a taxpayer perspective, if you have a shrinking tax base and yet you're increasing spending, what you're doing is you're placing an outsized burden on people that choose to stay here, and that makes it difficult to open business, that makes it difficult to have disposable income, which means businesses aren't going to expand as much as they would have. So I think the shrinking population, it's kind of a demographic winter as a term that I've used for that, is something that's very concerning. We need to be looking at ways to attract new folks here.
Mr. Bettner, what's your thoughts on it?
Pretty close to agree. I think as the population grays too, as people get older, there becomes more need for services, and that can hurt your tax base. So if you don't have the working force to be able to hold that up, and people that are working, that is something we should be majorly concerned about. I would put, immigration. We need immigration in West Virginia. We need more people that weren't born in West Virginia to come here, either from a different state or a different country. We should be welcoming people from all walks of life, doing everything we can. And the one way we do that is to make West Virginia a great place to live, work, invest, and raise a family. And there's things that we can do to do that. There's been talk about free college tuition at community colleges. One thing we could do is look at our four-year colleges. If we did that, which would cost less than the business tax cuts that we put in over the last decade, West Virginia would be a huge outlier in a great way. We'd be the only place in the country that has free tuition for all in-state residents. That would be a great incentive for families to move here, people to raise their families because they know that they can go to school here.
Now, we only have about a minute left, and I want to talk about economic diversification. Now, Mr. Ballingy, you said that we can't plan economic diversification. Can you just explain what you mean? And because that's what we keep hearing over and over again, is that West Virginia needs to diversify its economy.
Yeah, so I think it's seductive from a legislative standpoint to sit there and go after certain types of industries that you want to see here. It gives people a sense of control. And unfortunately, that's not the best way to diversify economy. What you want to do is you want to create an environment that makes it easy to grow and it makes it easy to start a business. And so what you end up having is bottom-up diversification through entrepreneurship and things like that, versus a legislative policy that tends to dictate what kind of industries we would like to have here, what kind of businesses we would like to have here. Just keep it as a low, stable regulatory environment, a low, stable tax environment, and you basically get out of people's way, and I think we'd see some diversification happen here in West Virginia.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but you've given us so much to think about today. Thank you both so much for joining us. We have Ted Bettner with the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy and Garrett Ballingy with the Cardinal Institute.
Thank you.
Thank you both. A bill that would eliminate the cabinet position of the Secretary of Education and the Arts and disperse the department's agency had a first reading in the House chamber this morning. Supporters say it's following the recommendations of a 2012 audit that suggested moving the Center for Professional Development under the West Virginia Department of Education. Currently, the center is an agency under the Department of Education and the Arts, but as Rebecca Turnbull reports, patrons of the arts are voicing their opposition, fearful that losing an advocate within the cabinet may irreversibly damage the status and strength of arts and cultural programs throughout the state. We note here that West Virginia Public Broadcasting is an agency within the Department of Education and the Arts.
The House Finance Committee passed a bill Friday with a vote of 14-10 to dismantle the Department of Education and the Arts and divide its programs up amongst lower-level state and independent agencies. Lead sponsor of House Bill 4006, Delegate Roger Romine, says he, however, doesn't see the bill as dismantling the department.
Well, I would disagree that it's dismantling. I would prefer to say that it is being transferred. And we're taking it over to the Department of Education, and those people there can address the same issues and needs that these other, entities can do.
Ironically, the bill was passed out of committee on the same day as the 2018 Arts in Our Communities Conference, just across the sidewalk here at the Culture Center. Division of Culture and History Commissioner Randall Reed-Smith says he hopes legislators across the way don't forget about the people who have gathered here.
I think it's more important that the legislators look inside the windows and see what we have. I must tell you, I've been at this 13 years, and the work that we've been able to do with the legislators, they've been there penny for pound. They've been very, very supportive. They know the importance of strong arts communities. They know the importance of strong arts education.
While Commissioner Reed-Smith says the legislature has strongly supported the arts in the past, Secretary of Education and the Arts Gail Manchin says she is worried that the bill, which would eliminate the department's cabinet position and reassign its agencies, will inhibit the ability of the arts to remain a strong factor in state decision-making.
If this cabinet position is dismantled, there is no state-level voice of advocacy for the arts in West Virginia. And if there's one thing that this state is rich, it's the heritage and the culture and the work of people, the traditions and heritage, that when the governor asked me to assume this position, it was about promoting, preserving, protecting, forwarding all of that culture and history around our state. If this office is dismantled, that takes away that voice. There is no other office to assume that responsibility of advocacy and passion for the arts.
Those who participate in the arts from around the state are also concerned that the lack of a voice for the arts in the upper levels of state government could possibly lead to a fallout in the amount of people who choose to visit or live in West Virginia.
My fear, if our voice was dropped down, was any less than it is, and already I think that the arts in West Virginia, their importance and their quality and the quantity of arts in West Virginia is already sort of undersold, and we have this one voice that's sort of out there pushing us. So I fear losing that voice, not only for the arts, but because it's a tremendous impact on economy and tourism.
Despite the potential negative impacts that opponents outline, House Bill 4006's lead sponsor says the goal is mainly to restructure the educational side of the department to allow for more local control.
I think it gets it back to what I refer to as the point of service. And West Virginia is so diverse, and my district is different, and needs are different, and the strengths and weaknesses are different than it might be, let's say, in the Eastern Panhandle or Charleston or Southern West Virginia. So I think it zeroes in on, what's more appropriate to my district. And I'm kind of the thinking that the best education is education closest to the students, closest to the people. And so the more that we can, move those decision-making issues to the school level, I think the better off we are.
As the bill makes its way to the House floor, it appears delegates' decisions to vote yes or no on the bill will fall between two seemingly conflicting ideals: the preservation of a cabinet-level voice for the arts or the localization of all education-related matters. For the Legislature Today, I'm Rebecca Turnbull at the Capitol.
House Bill 4006 will be on amendment stage tomorrow in the House. And finally tonight, another question from one of our viewers in our I'd Like to Know segment. Tonight, a concern about broadband and internet access, and an answer provided by Senator Greg Bozo of Nicholas County.
Hello, my name is Katanya Hart, and I'm from Charleston, West Virginia. And my question is, what are we going to do about communication across the state? There are still places that do not have internet access as well as cell phone communication.
The last legislative session, we actually took up an internet broadband bill. that allows us to expand internet by various companies in order to serve residents in these rural, difficult to reach areas. We will continue to work on those particular opportunities. Obviously, we're working closely with our federal counterparts, including Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who's very passionate about expanding broadband throughout West Virginia. We recognize too that there's those areas where cell phone service is very sparse. We continue to work with partners, business leaders here that do nothing but cell phone service, allowing them to expand and finding ways that we can work together to assure that people, when they pick up a cell phone, regardless of whether it's in downtown Charleston or whether it's in rural Monroe or Pocahontas County, will have coverage and be able to talk to emergency services or to their local families across the nation.
We'd like to hear from more of our viewers. Post your video questions to our Twitter or Facebook accounts with the hashtag WVI'dLikeToKnow, or send an email to wvI'dLikeToKnow@wvpublic.org. That's it for tonight's program. Please join us again tomorrow night at 6 for the Legislature Today. I'm Andrea Lanham for West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Thanks for watching and have a great evening.